Now, Ms Mitchell, I understand you have an additional point.
Yes, I do, and that additional point arises as a result of disclosure in Tranche 18. The inquiry will know that disclosure is ongoing throughout the course of the inquiry, as these things do. And Tranche 18 was disclosed on the 5th of February 2024, revealing an additional statement of Irene Scullion of PIRC. This additional statement was taken from her to allow her to comment on comments attributed to her by Kate Frame. Kate Frame says that she's told by Miss Scullion, and this is to be found at Kate Frame's statement 162, 163 and 164, that she then said, and this is referring to Irene Scullion, she then said that a man had been seen chasing after cars with a knife, that the police had been dispatched, and Police Scotland had considered that it might be a terrorist incident. Against the backdrop of the information that she provided, I didn't understand why it had been considered to be a terrorist incident and asked why. She said it was because the man was what she described as a coloured gentleman. And I asked her what she meant by that and whether there was anything else to point to it being a terrorist incident, as I still found it quite difficult to understand what would cause the police to think that the incident was terror-related. She said that his actions in chasing after and striking out at cars with a knife may have contributed to that belief, and she referenced an attack in England. Ms Scullion informed me that Police Scotland and not the individual officers had considered it might be a terrorist incident. And I have been asked where Irene Scullion obtained the information.
Ms Mitchell, could I ask you to slow down a little bit?
Sorry.
I think the stenographer is...
I have been asked where Irene Scullion obtained the information that Police Scotland had considered it might be a terrorist incident. I don't know, but I would assume that she spoke to Mr Harrower and someone in Police Scotland. Now, a statement was then taken from Irene Scullion. She denies she used the phrase a coloured gentleman, but when asked in relation to who told her this question, she said it would have been Mr Harrower or Mr Carey. So I would like to put to this witness whether or not it was him that said this, whether or not he raised the issue of terrorism with Irene Scullion in a telephone call, and if this was linked to Mr Bayo's colour. Further, my lord, yesterday you asked me in relation to the first issue the date of when it was known by Mr Harrower that the information had changed. And further to investigation, it appears that the document which is referred to in which the information had changed was available to Mr Harrower prior to taking a statement from him on 4th of June 2015.
Thank you. And thank you for giving notice of the additional matter which I shall allow you to explore. In relation to the proposed questions about briefing document PIRC 03694, I shall allow that line of questioning. I shall also allow the proposed questions as to whether the witness was aware of the suggestion that officers were refusing to give statements pending the outcome of the post-mortem, and if so, whether he discussed that with Mr Green. In relation to the application in respect of the section on restraint in the witness interview strategy PIRC 04182, having regard to the terms of the general introductory paragraph under the heading Arrest and Restraint, I do not think that this line of questioning would assist me, and I shall not allow that. In relation to the further questioning about the Commissioner's letter to Mr Anwar, no doubt Miss Frame can be asked about the letter in due course. I do not think that I would be assisted by further exploration of this chapter with this witness, and I shall not allow that. I shall allow Miss McCall to ask her questions in relation to the Rule 8 statement of Ross Sinclair. So if we can have the witness back, please, and if Ms Mitchell and Ms Graham could rearrange the seating. Good morning, Mr. Harrower. You're going to be asked some questions first this morning by Ms. Mitchell, Senior Counsel for the Sheku families. Ms. Mitchell.
I'm obliged. I wonder if we could have up on screen PIRC 03694. This is the briefing note of the 3rd of May, which we've already looked at when my learned friend was asking you questions. If we can scroll down to the part where it said they could clearly see he was in possession of a knife and was making his way towards them. I think it's down on the next page. Yes, if we stop there. Do you see in that second paragraph there, it was reported that the officers drove into Hayfield Road?
Yes, I can.
And that paragraph here. Now, we understand from your evidence that you gave yesterday that after this time, it became apparent that the idea that Mr. Bio had a knife with him, in possession of a knife, and was making his way towards him, might not in fact be correct. Is that so?
Yeah, that wasn't on the Sunday. That was sort of in the early stages, I think, the inquiry as it progressed. I don't know what the actual timescale on that
Indeed.
was.
But we know from a document that we also saw yesterday in relation to preparation for witness questions that by, as of the date, I think the 4th of June, there was a document prepared which moved away from a statement that, that the officers, or that Mr. Bio had been seen with a knife in his possession.
Yeah, and I think there was a note in brackets, I think, from memory, from looking at it, questioning that or suggesting that that might not be the case.
Indeed. So what I would like to ask you about that is, given the fact that this information was posed so definitively at the time, they could clearly see he was in possession of a knife and making his way towards them, and that is a report you have been given. When you found out that that may not be the case and that there was a different narrative in place, that he didn't have a knife when the police approached him, did you become suspicious that at some point officers or someone had suggested that he was clearly in possession of a knife and he moved away and they moved away from that?
So this is clearly into the inquiry after the Sunday
yes.
you're referring to. Obviously at that stage the direction on the investigation was being conducted by Billy Little and John McSpawn. Now, I'm aware, certainly I don't know any great detail, that the other officers, other than the officers who did not initially provide accounts of the incident, were interviewed in relation to that, in relation to their observations and involvement in the incident. And I would believe that that would be covered with any of these officers as regards what their observations were, what was conveyed back and forward.
With respect, isn't my question. My question is, having been told, first of all, that someone was in possession of a knife and was making his way towards people, and then finding out later that that was not the case, or didn't seem to be the case, would that make you suspicious that at the start you'd not been told the right information?
It would certainly, I think, make it clear that the information that was conveyed was not factual.
And if that information was conveyed as not factual, would that cause you to be concerned that someone had lied about that?
Not specifically lie, no, because as I said, I think in the evidence that I gave previously that it's not common, but it's happened a lot where you get initial versions of event which is given in all honesty and what has been passed, but maybe through, as it goes through different hands, it potentially gets mixed up, or there's a misinterpretation of what they've been told. So that's a kind of collective in that information that's passed on during the briefing.
So at a later stage when you were asking questions, we know that you asked questions of at least one witness, and he was one of the first to attend at the scene. Did you inquire as to why it had been the case that an impression was formed, first of all, that Mr. Bayo had clearly been in possession of a knife, and thereafter that had changed?
I can't remember the detail of the statement. I would need to look at that. The purpose of that interview was to follow the initial interview plan to gain as much information as possible about that officer's lead up to the incident, his involvement directly with Mr. Bayo, and I think I also said that any questions that I thought were relevant during the course of that interview to add on to that would be asked and would be contained within the statement.
But Mr. Harrower, wouldn't it have been significant to you if you believed that you had information that you'd been told that police officers, they could clearly see he was in possession of a knife and making his way towards them, and then in that second interview you're being told something different, to explore that difference?
Well, I don't know what the origins collectively of that information was. I
Indeed,
understand.
Wouldn't that be all the more reason
Yeah,
you might want to explore that?
My understanding was that the officers had not given accounts, so
Well, the officers might not have given accounts, but we have a briefing note, and you explained the importance of the briefing note yesterday to the chair and why that was important. And the briefing note is clear that it says he was in possession of a knife and making his way towards them. If we took it away from this example and we moved, for example, towards a civilian incident, and you had found out as a police officer, take it away from PIRC, just take it as a police officer, if you had identified as a police officer that you'd been told by somebody that they'd seen a man in possession of a knife making their way towards someone, and then you found out later that that wasn't the case, would you not be interested in pursuing that as a line of inquiry as to why that had changed?
depending on the circumstances, that would be possible, that would be pursued after the event to then fill in any apparent blanks or to complete the whole picture.
And did you pursue that with the witness that you asked? of
Not on
evidence?
the Sunday, no.
Did you pursue it at all?
Not personally, no. But as I said, my understanding is that a number of witnesses, obviously the officers that attended the scene immediately after the incident started, that would have given accounts.
When you said not personally, do you know if any of your colleagues did?
I'm aware in general that the other officers that attended were interviewed at some stage. I don't know.
But you don't know
specifically
whether
when.
they followed the line of inquiry of the change in position?
No, I don't know.
The next question I'd like to ask you is about you attended at Kirkcaldy Police Office on the 3rd, and no doubt you were getting information. You've already mentioned Pat Campbell. Were you aware from anyone, including Pat Campbell or otherwise, that it had been said that police officers would not provide a statement until the outcome of the post-mortem?
No, I was told that on legal advice that the officers received, they were not providing witness accounts at that time. I wasn't aware that that related in some form to the potential outcome of post-mortem.
I see. So if that was the case, did you become aware later that that was the position, not on the day of the 3rd? Did you become aware at a later stage?
I'm not sure as in relation to any reference to the post-mortem.
So you wouldn't be able to ask,
No.
assist us as to whether or not Mr. Green was aware of that. You certainly didn't pass that information on to him.
No, I did not, no.
I'd like to go back to an issue that was discussed yesterday, and that issue was about your. I'll come to that later. I'd like to discuss an issue with you in relation to evidence that we've not heard yet, but written evidence which we will come to hear of an Irene Scullion. You know Irene Scullion, she's
Yes,
a
I do,
colleague of
yeah.
yours. Can you give us her title
She
at
was
the time?
previously the head of investigations for the PIRC.
And as she was head of investigations, were you having conversations with her on the 3rd of the 3rd of May, or?
No, I don't believe I spoke to her on the 3rd, probably on the Monday, the 4th of May.
I see. Is there a reason you wouldn't have spoken to her on the 3rd?
Not particularly. I would probably believe, I don't know for sure, that Ricky Casey would have spoken to her in his position as a senior investigator.
I see. So you presume it would be Mr. Casey that would have a conversation?
And that's a presumption. I don't know for sure whether he spoke to her that day or the following day.
Did you speak to Mr. Casey and ask him at all, or was there any conversation between the two of you as to who would report that matter up?
No, I don't recall any. It would be something that I would expect would be done at the head of investigations if it was a critical incident at some point. Would be made aware of the existence and the fact that we had resources deployed to it.
When you spoke to her, can you recall what your conversation was about? Did you tell her about the background of the incident?
I don't know the specific conversations. Again, this would be speculation. As a matter of routine, if she was in the office, then I would certainly have some conversation regarding the activities and involvement of myself and my team that day. But
well,
I don't recall any direct conversation with her at this stage.
If I may read from you, this is a statement given from Kate Frame, and she says she's repeating something told by Ms. Scullion.
Okay.
So Kate Frame's statement, I don't need it brought up unless... Oh, it's available, thank you. Kate Frame's statement, paragraph 162, thank you. So we see paragraph 162, it starts, she then said that the man had been seen. So this is Kate Frame referencing Irene Scullion. She then said that the man had been seen chasing after cars with a knife, that the police had been dispatched, and that Police Scotland had considered that it might be a terrorist incident. Against the backdrop of the information that she'd provided, I didn't understand why it had been considered to be a terrorist incident and asked why. She said it was because the man was what she described as a coloured gentleman, and asked her what she meant by that and whether there was anything else to point to it being a terrorist incident, as I still found it quite difficult to understand what would cause the police officers to think that the incident was terror-related. She said that his actions in chasing after and striking out at cars with the knife may have contributed to that belief, and she referenced an attack in England. Mrs. Scullion informed me that Police Scotland and not the individual officers had considered it might be a terrorist incident. And then she says, I have been asked where Irene Scullion obtained the information that Police Scotland considered it might be a terrorist incident. I don't know, but I would assume that she spoke to Mr. Harrower or someone within Police Scotland. Now, when Irene Scullion was asked about this, first of all, she took issue with Kate Frame's description as being a coloured gentleman. But secondly, she says that she would have received the information from Mr. Casey or Mr. Harrower. Now, what I would like to ask you is, having heard that, firstly, were you aware that Police Scotland were considering it a terrorist incident in the first stages?
No, and it wasn't. There was no consideration of that was raised with me at all.
No consideration.
No.
And so there's no consideration, you would say, presumably, that would be raised with Mr. Casey either?
No. He was, as far as I'm aware, was basically got the information direct from me at any stage on an update during the course of that day. So to read that's a surprise to me. That certainly never came from me, because if there'd been anything that had suggested that was terrorist linked, then clearly that would have been highlighted in that briefing document as well.
So what we have is Kate Frame telling her that Irene Scullion has heard this from either you or Mr. Casey and reported it back. That's as we understand it.
Not
So,
a possibility of it.
Are you suggesting it's not a possibility that either you or Mr. Casey?
No, I'm suggesting from my part, I can only speak from my part, and I can only convey that I gave updates to Ricky Casey during the course of the day, but I've never articulated that in relation to considerations for the incident.
This inquiry has heard evidence that at the very early stages of the inquiry, that was an initial but discounted hypothesis. Were you
Correct.
aware of that?
Yes.
Had you been aware of that on the day?
Yes.
Is it possible that you communicated that with her on that morning and later the situation changed and that's why you can't remember it?
I think it's unlikely, because if that had been considered and dismissed at an early stage, then the relevance of that, I can't see that being included in a detailed outline and summary of the incident.
But Mr. Casey,
Unless I had been asked to respond, was there any consideration that that was the case, and then I would have confirmed that was no.
but Mr. Casey was getting his information from you about what was
As far
happening
as I'm
on the day.
aware, I mean, I don't know what other communications he had with anyone who had a good understanding of how things were developing on the day, other than I know he was involved in relation to the media side of things, whether he actually communicated with Police Scotland or Crown in relation to any of that, and there was any discussions there, but I say I'm just...
Following the chain of command, would you have expected anyone else who was there that day to have been passing information to him?
That didn't happen as far as I'm aware. I would be the single point of contact and the conduit for that.
Ms Mitchell, if you would go back to your seat, and Ms McCall would come forward. Mr Harrower, Ms McCall, Senior Counsel for Sergeant Maxwell, has some questions for you. Ms McCall.
Mr Harrower, yesterday afternoon you were asked a number of questions about the interview strategy that was prepared by one of PIRC's interview advisors. And you were asked about the fact that there were no questions in that seeking information from the officers to justify their use of force. Do you remember that passage of questions? And I think you were also asked whether you or less senior investigators might have felt constrained by the interview strategy from asking other questions. Do you recall that?
Yes, I recall that.
And I think you said you personally didn't feel constrained, is that right?
No, not at all, far from it.
An example was given to you of another investigator who might have felt constrained, and that was Ross Stewart. Do you remember being asked about that?
Yes.
And a quote from Mr Stewart was put to you, and I'll just remind you what was put to you as a quote from him. It was, "I do not recall considering specifically asking Sergeant Maxwell why he took a particular course of action. I do not recall being encouraged to ask why." Now, it may have appeared that was a single remark from Mr Stewart, but in fact it's sentences that come from different parts of his statement that have been put together when they're presented to you.
Okay.
So what I want to do is just put those sentences in their actual context and ask for your comment. You follow me?
Yes, absolutely.
The context of the first part of it was put to you that Ross Stewart didn't appear to consider asking questions about what the justification was for the use of force or the intention to use force. And the part that was put to you about that was, "I do not recall considering specifically asking Sergeant Maxwell why he took a particular course of action." Now, leaving aside for the moment that the inquiry's evidence is that Sergeant Maxwell didn't use force at all against Mr Bio, I take it he may have been asked to justify decisions that he took as the supervisor that day. Would that be fair?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So I want to give you the actual quote from Mr Stewart, and it was this: "I do not recall considering specifically asking Sergeant Maxwell why he took a particular course of action. He answered this question with the answers he provided." So that was the whole remark from Mr Stewart. Does that accord with the approach that you were describing yesterday, that as matters developed in the interview, the officer witnesses may have volunteered the why for their actions, in which case you would have noted that down?
Yes, from what you've said there, it comes across to me that he has considered that. However, the officer that he's interviewing has provided that information, thus negating the need to pursue that any further. And that's a decision for him, quite rightly, conducting the interview and evaluating whether he has sufficient information to cover all the questions that may be asked.
Right. The second part of it is, it was also put to you that Mr. Stewart said, and this was the last bit of the quote that was put to you, "I do not recall being encouraged to ask why." And that was, the suggestion was, he may have felt constrained in some way by the strategy. So I'll read you now the full quote from Mr. Stewart, from which that came. And it's this: "I was noting Sergeant Maxwell's statement. I, as an investigator, would have no issues to adding additional questions before the interview and asking more questions during the interview if I felt it necessary, while remaining focused on the purpose of the interview. I do not recall being encouraged to ask why." So with that whole quote now available to you, again, does Mr. Stewart appear to have taken the same approach as you, which was that he felt at liberty to ask further questions if needed?
Again, if I was evaluating what I thought that meant, that would be exactly the case, that he would develop that interview and record that information as he saw fit. And that the last part of that quotation is, I don't know if that was in response to a question, but he's made the comment that, stating fact, that nobody's encouraged him to do that. However, the way he was approaching it was methodical, and he would use his own initiative as far as additional questioning and with that witness on whatever subject matter he was involved in at that time.
On the 4th of June, you've told us about you and a number of investigators going to the police college to interview the officer witnesses.
Yes.
And I think what you said to us yesterday was you had some discussions beforehand about the strategy and what was going to happen, and you also had breaks in between where
Yes.
things could be discussed if
Yes.
needs be. Is that right?
Yes.
Do you consider that Mr. Stewart, or indeed any of the PIRC investigators that interviewed the officers that day, were in any way hampered by the interview strategy?
No, I say that was initially there as a specific guide. There's obviously been observations that certain opinions, that questions could be included within that, but nobody would ever be persuaded to take one straight line on things and then not use their initiative and their experience to ask the relevant questions as the interview and the statement developed.
Many thanks, Mr. Harrower. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Harrower, thank you very much for coming to give evidence to the inquiry. That's the evidence completed now. I'm grateful for your time. The inquiry is going to adjourn briefly in order to organise things for the next witness, and when that happens, you'll be free to go.
Thank you, sir.
We're adjourned now. Good morning, Mr. Lewis. Will you raise your hand and say the words of the oath? I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God,
that I will tell the truth,
I will tell the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Ms. Thompson.
Good morning, Mr. Lewis.
Morning.
Can you confirm your full name
Alistair Lewis,
and your age?
61.
I believe that you're a Deputy Senior Investigator with the Police Investigations and Review Commissioner.
Yes.
We've been calling them PIRC for short.
Yes.
I believe that you've worked for the PIRC since 2013,
Yes.
initially as an investigator,
Yes.
and that you were promoted to Deputy Senior Investigator in 2018.
That's correct, yes.
Before we go any further, can I ask you to take a look at the blue folder that's in front of you? There's some documents in there that you might find it helpful to refer to during the course of your evidence, so I'll just take you through what should be in the folder.
Thank you.
First of all, there should be a statement that you prepared on the 9th of July of 2015. That's PIRC 00341. If we could bring that up on the screen for a moment, please. So do we see that this is a statement prepared by you on the 9th of July of 2015?
Yes.
What was the purpose of you preparing that statement?
The main reason for that was the start of the investigation. Rather than preparing a statement at the end of the investigation, you had it ongoing and could fill into it. However, predominantly my flow log was my terms of, or my reference book for any future statements.
Okay. So why was the statement prepared on the 9th of July?
No specific reason on the 9th of July, probably just a time that I took the time to sit down and make a start one, and it just happened to be the 9th of July.
And did you prepare any further operational statements after the one that you prepared on the 9th of July?
No, I think that was a sort of continuation. I had that, I feel like, a living document, for want of a better word, which I then completed at the end of the investigation.
Sorry, what was the living document?
The statement, just it was something I could go into and update as and when required, with reference to my flow log.
I see. So although it's dated the 9th of July, do I understand correctly that you started writing the statement on the 9th of July, but completed it at some later date?
Probably, yeah.
I wonder if we can just be clear on that, Mr. Lewis. I don't think we need to look at the statement on the screen in detail, but if you have it open in front of you, it's a chronological record of your involvement with the family of Mr. Bayo. It begins with your involvement on the 4th of May. On the second page of this statement, the statement's only a few pages long, there's the detail of your involvement on the 4th of May. On the third page, we see entries that relate to the 5th and 6th of May, the 8th of May, 13th and 14th of May. The page after that takes us from the 29th of May through June and all the way up to the 6th of July. And the final entry on the last page of the statement relates to the events of the 8th of July.
Yes.
And the statement was written on the 9th of July.
Yes.
So I'm wondering whether, in fact, this statement is a record of your involvement up to and including the 9th of July.
It could well be. It was maybe I sat down on the 9th of July and compiled my involvement to that point with reference to the flow log. Again, the 9th of July would be a time when I just sat down to do a statement.
All right. You'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I certainly don't see any entries in the statement that go beyond the 9th of July.
No, no.
So it appears that this was a statement that you prepared on the 9th of July that records your involvement with Mr. Bayo's family up to the 9th of July.
Yes.
But you said a moment ago that you didn't prepare any further operational statements.
No.
Although you did also mention the flow logs.
Yes.
We'll talk about those in a little bit more detail later, but should I understand that the flow logs record your involvement with Mr. Bayo's family beyond the 9th of July of 2015?
Yes.
When you prepared that statement, did you do your best to tell the truth and give an accurate account of your involvement?
Yes, yes.
We can put that statement to one side and look at what else is in the folder. There should be 2 statements that you have provided to this inquiry. The first has the reference SBPI 00246.
Yes.
And it was prepared on the 25th of October of 2022. So this is your statement, and if we can go to the very last page, please. We'll see that the statement was signed on the 23rd of January of 2023, and although your signature has been blacked out, there should be a visible signature on the hard copy in your folder. If we look at the final paragraph, paragraph 43, it reads, "I believe the facts stated in this witness statement are true. I understand that this statement may form part of the evidence before the inquiry and be published on the inquiry's website."
Yes.
And you gave the statement in that knowledge that your statement would form part of the evidence for the chair. A year later, you gave a second statement to the inquiry on the 24th and 25th of October of 2023, and that's SBPI 00432. That should be the next document in your folder.
Yes.
So again, if we scroll down just a little, we see that it's your statement taken on the 24th and 25th of October of last year. And again, if we can go to the last page, please. We see that it was signed on the 17th of January of this year. Again, your signature has been redacted, but should be visible in the copy that you have. And the final paragraph is in identical terms to the final paragraph in your previous statement. So again, you confirm that the facts stated in the witness statement are true, and you understand that the statement may form part of the evidence before the inquiry.
Yes.
You should also have in your folder, and we don't need to put these on the screen just yet, the flow logs that you referred to, and there should be 3 logs there.
Yes, that's correct.
We'll look at these logs in detail later on, but the purpose of including them in your folder, Mr. Lewis, is so that they're available to you if you would find it helpful to refer to your statements or to the logs at any point when you're giving your evidence. Then please do so.
Okay.
There are certain passages that I'll ask to be brought up on the screen where I want to ask you some questions. If there's anything that you would like me to put up on the screen, then just let me know.
Yeah, okay.
I want to begin by asking you some questions about your career and your experience. And in your first inquiry statement, you explained that you began your career in 1979 as a cadet with Strathclyde Police Force.
Yes.
And in 1980, you became a constable in South Lanarkshire. If you'll forgive my geographical ignorance, is South Lanarkshire within what was the geographical boundaries of Strathclyde Police?
Yes, it was, yeah.
In 1991, you explain in your statement you transferred to road policing.
Yes.
And after 10 years in road policing, you were promoted to sergeant.
Yes, that's correct.
You explained that there was a short stint back in divisional policing, but otherwise you remained in road policing until your retirement in 2010,
Yes.
by which time you had 30 years of police service. So roughly speaking, 10 years in divisional policing and 20 years in road policing.
Yes.
You explained that during your time in road policing, you were appointed as a senior investigating officer for road traffic deaths.
Yes.
And you were also appointed as a family liaison officer and a family liaison coordinator.
Yes.
You retired in 2010, and I wanted to ask, what was your rank when you retired?
Sergeant.
You then joined the PIRC in 2013,
Yes.
initially as discussed as an investigator, and I think also as a family liaison officer.
Yes.
You were promoted in 2018 to Deputy SIO and also, I think, Family Liaison Coordinator.
I was family liaison coordinator prior to that, but yes, that was predominantly my role after being promoted.
When did you become a family liaison coordinator?
I'd been trained within Strathclyde Police as a family liaison coordinator, and again with PIRC I was over in Dublin for another course which effectively was a refresher course for me.
So were you both a family liaison officer and family liaison coordinator from the point of your appointment with the PIRC?
Yes, I had been on those training courses, yes, within Strathclyde Police.
I understand that you haven't deployed as a family liaison officer since you were promoted in 2018.
Yeah, I took on more of a coordination role in relation to the at that time, 2015, I had about 6 flows, and then it progressed to about 12. So because my position as a line manager, I felt it was more appropriate for me to coordinate the flows within the organisation than trying to be deployed, unless it was an absolute necessity in relation to an investigation.
I think you explain in your second inquiry statement that you took a step back from the deployments and you focused on the coordination
Yes.
side of flow work. Now, we're going to discuss the role and responsibilities of a family liaison officer, or FLO for short, in some detail, but I wonder, as a general introduction to the subject, if you could explain what a FLO is.
Family liaison officers takes the role of communication. You're a conduit between the family and the senior investigating officer of any investigation. So it's to establish the parameters of that role and to liaise with the family and to pass information to the family and back to the SIO, and also to engage with the family from a involvement, public family involvement point of view.
Is there any real difference between the role of a FLO in the police and the role of a FLO in the PIRC?
No, it's a national course, a training course, so within the police you sometimes hear people referring to CID flows and road policing flows and divisional flows. There is no difference. It's the same course that everybody goes on, and it's since coming into PIRC, as I said, did the family liaison coordinators course. It's the same standard or accredited course that you will go on. The only slight difference between ourselves and the police now is that because of excuse me, suggest that the sort of lack of knowledge of our role within PIRC, we may deploy more flows or flows on a more frequent basis than Police Scotland would do because of the public's lack of understanding of what our role is.
I'd like to ask you to look at the PIRC Family Liaison Policy document, which is PIRC 04460. And although it doesn't have a date, the PIRC have confirmed in a position statement that this was in force in May of 2015. So if we can look at the first page, it confirms it's an official PIRC document and it's headed up Family Liaison Policy. Can we look at the first page of the policy, please? The introduction begins, one of the most important considerations throughout the investigation of a death is providing support to the family of the deceased. Families should be considered as partners in an investigation and must be treated appropriately, professionally, with respect and according to their needs. Would you agree with that statement?
Yes.
Are you familiar with this policy?
Yes.
Is it something that you had access to back in 2015?
Back as far back as 2013 I had access to a flow policy, but yes, I'm aware of that one as well.
I believe this policy actually dates to 2013 and was still in force in 2015.
Yes, that's
so
correct.
it would be the same policy, I think. What's the purpose of the PIRC preparing a policy of this sort?
As with any policy, it's to have a standards approach to in relation to family liaison or in relation to any investigation as to what's expected of the flow and the SIO and the flow coordinator.
So is this then a set of standards that flows are expected to abide by?
It's more of a guidance, I would say, rather than standards. It'd be very difficult to put down, and I think if you created standards which must be, you could restrict any kind of involvement with the family. So it is a guidance as to what is expected of the flow, and not only their selection but also what's expected of them if they're deployed after training.
Okay. We do have a position statement from the PIRC in which this document is described as being the standards that are expected of a flow, but you would take a slightly different view and you see this more as a guidance document.
It's standard. It's a guidance for flows to do that. So if that is what the organisation is, standards, then yes, I would agree with that. It's something that I would refer to if I needed to do so. I know it's there and I know I can refer to it if required.
And would there be an expectation that flows would follow the guidance set out in
Yes,
this document? Yeah. Can we go to the bottom of that page, please, where there's a heading underpinning philosophy? Let's look at this. In the event of the death of a human being, where there is a PIRC investigation, PIRC have a positive duty to communicate effectively and inclusively with the bereaved family. Can I pause there just to ask you, what is your understanding of the legal basis that underpins that duty?
It's under the Article 2 of the Human Rights Act, whereby it's family involvement in relation to the investigation and keeping them informed and making them aware of, in this occasion, a Crown-directed investigation and what is expected of us from the Crown Office and moving forward and what we can and cannot do. It is very much of keeping the family involved in the investigation, but also explaining at the same time from the very outset that because of the nature of the investigation, there may well be occasions when they may ask a question, but I would be unable to answer that due to protect the integrity of the investigation as it progresses.
Let's return to the screen. On most occasions, this can be achieved by deploying a trained family liaison officer. In discharging their responsibility for family liaison, the aims of PIRC service are to analyse the needs, concerns and expectations of the family in order to identify relevant and realistic action that should be taken in the context of their human rights and the obligations set out in this document, to work with the family in order to comply with their right to receive all relevant information connected with the inquiry, subject to the needs of the investigation, to gather all information and evidence from them which will assist the investigation in a way which takes cognizance of their fundamental human rights, the right to privacy and family life. The main objectives arising from these aims are to provide information to and signpost support for the family in a sensitive and compassionate manner in accordance with the needs of the investigation, to gather evidence and information from the family in a manner which contributes to the investigation and preserves its integrity, and to secure the confidence and trust of the family, thereby enhancing their contribution to the investigation. The initial priority must be to establish communication with the family as soon as practicable in order to furnish them with any information that they require in accordance with the needs of the investigation. In supporting the family throughout the investigation, sensitivity, compassion and respect for the needs and requirements of the family must underpin the approach to gathering evidence and information. Would you agree with what's set out there?
Yes.
So the role of a flow includes both providing information to a family and also in gathering information from the family that might be relevant to the investigation.
I think it's to establish it. Although I'm a flow, first and foremost, and it's explained to the family at the very outset, is that I am an investigator and it's my job to investigate the circumstances, but I have the skills as a family liaison officer and been trained to that standard.
Yes, I think you say in your statement, from a family liaison point of view, you are an investigator first and foremost.
Yes.
And you have the skill as a flow, and that's your second statement, paragraph 6. And indeed, the family liaison policy, if we can scroll down quickly to, I think it's page 18. We see in bold and underlined the primary function of a flow is that of investigator.
Yes.
Okay. Let me share with you some evidence from a police family liaison officer, Kevin Houliston. His statement is SBPI 00354. And again, it's on the theme of the functions of the flow. Can we look at paragraphs 39 and 40, please? I've been asked whether it is correct that flows are primarily investigators. Yes, they are primarily investigators, however, they serve a dual purpose in all investigations, with a secondary but equally important role of acting as a link between the SIO and the family to provide them with relevant information. The primary one is that of an investigator. Flows are part of the inquiry team, and they are a very important part of the inquiry team because more often than not, there is information that would, without a doubt, be relevant to the inquiry, which has to be obtained from the family. On some occasions, more so than others, but there will always be information that will assist the inquiry that flows are able to obtain. From that regard, they are very much part of the inquiry team. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I agree with that.
And I think the word that you used earlier in your evidence was flow as a conduit. So you're essentially passing information from the investigation to the family and obtaining information from the family and passing that back
Yes.
into the investigation. As you say, your primary role is that of an investigator, and I wonder, in your experience, do families understand that you are first and foremost an investigator?
It's certainly explained to them at the very outset what the role is, or my role is, and yes, we do make it quite clear that we are investigating the circumstances, and I will be their family liaison officer and explain, just as we've discussed, how that information will be passed between us and the family.
And in your experience, does it concern families that their family liaison officer is embedded within the investigation team?
From my experience, no. They understand the nature of the investigation and what our role is.
Can we look now at another document, please? It's PIRC 04457. And this is a guide for families on the role of the PIRC and flows. This was published in July of 2014. And if we can look at the first page of text, please. If we can scroll down a little bit, please. Keep going, please. There's a heading I'm looking for called Who Are PIRC Flows? There we are, I'm sorry, I had the wrong page reference. Who are PIRC flows? PIRC flows are specially trained and are part of the investigation team. Flows are appointed to give you and your family information about the investigation. In most cases, the flow will liaise with you throughout the investigation and is your single point of contact. The flow will ask you to nominate a family member or person to be the contact person for you or your family. We can scroll down a little, please. The flow will keep you updated on the progress of the investigation, will give you as much information as possible, as quickly as possible, and will try to answer your questions throughout the investigation. The flow may also have questions for you. Would you agree with what you've read on the screen
Yes.
so far, Mr. Lewis? What is their role? The main role of the flow is to develop a two-way flow of information between the investigation team and you and your family. The role of the flow may include the following: explaining their role to you, providing you with details on how you may contact them, passing any information provided by you to the investigation team, taking statements from you, family members and friends to assist the investigation, answering any questions which you may have about the investigation, updating you on the progress of the investigation, giving you information about other agencies which may provide support for you and your family, and liaising with other agencies. Should you require any further information or have any concerns, you may contact your flow. Would you agree with everything that we have seen
Yes.
in that document? So again, this is a document. Can I assume that this is the sort of document that you might be able to provide to families? It's a guide for families on the role of the PIRC and flows?
Yes.
Is this something that families can access online, or is it something that you would hand out, or possibly both?
I think they can access it online. It's certainly something we'd hand out. It was actually myself that put forward this suggestion in relation to help families to identify the role of the flow, and that was through conversations and meetings with fellow flows from our colleagues in Ireland and Northern Ireland. So it was my idea to put that forward to the organisation to help families know the role of the family liaisons.
And it sets out very clearly under the heading, who are the PIRC flows, that they're specially trained and are part of the investigation team. So again, it is making clear that your role is that of an investigator.
Yes, it's a quick reference for any families to look at and refresh their memory should they have any questions. We also had, at that time, we had wasn't a form, it was the information was compacted into the size of a credit card, which could go into somebody's wallet along with contact cards from myself or any flow within the organisation.
Can we bring up on the screen, please, your second inquiry statement and have a look at paragraph 33. Please. Thank you. You were asked about your police experience and whether it has advantages or disadvantages from your work at PIRC. And you say, I think it was more of an advantage than a disadvantage because you have a knowledge of how policies and procedures work and the practicalities of policing and the role of the police officers. You had the knowledge to go and deal with any incident, whether it was from a road policing background, a firearms background, sexual offences. We had all these skills within the organisation that we could tap into at any time. To date, I have not experienced any disadvantage of my police experience. Whilst I believe the PIRC will always need police knowledge and experience within the organisation, it is my opinion in order to improve our independence, we need staff from a non-police background to enhance our independent role. In 2013, our head of investigations was a female from a non-police background. Was that Irene Scullion?
Yes.
She promoted our independence at every opportunity. When she retired from the PIRC in 2017, I feel we lost our independence within investigations and senior management. Who replaced her in 2017?
John McSporn.
A criticism of the Day Mailish report was the number of retired senior police officers in a management role within PIRC leaving the organisation open to criticism based on the danger of unconscious bias. The current situation could affect public confidence in the PIRC investigations into senior officers within Police Scotland. Since the retirement of that HOI, this has not improved but has significantly worsened and is male-dominated. I see that as a disadvantage to the PIRC and has hindered the progress of female staff, those from a non-police background, and those who have been through our trainee programme. So I wanted to ask some questions about this paragraph. Can you explain how the current situation could affect public confidence in PIRC investigations into senior officers within Police Scotland?
I think from in the past we have had investigations in relation to senior officers within Police Scotland, and that was overseen and conducted by Irene Scullion and a member of a DSI from a non-police background, which I think is a beneficial tool within the organisation to have that and increases our independence. I think also from the public's point of view it leaves us open to criticism, but at the same time I'm confident that all the investigations that have been led in the past and up to the present time, they have been thorough, they have been effective, and where criticism has been delivered to Police Scotland, it is justifiable criticism. I think our website shows that, and where we have taken Police Scotland to task on certain situations and procedures. Our main objective is to ensure that policies and procedures within Police Scotland are fit for purpose, and that if we can improve the public's confidence or enhance the public's confidence by criticising that and making sure that those policies and procedures are there for the officer on the street, then that is a good outcome.
So is your concern then the perception of independence, given the number of former police officers within PIRC as an organisation?
It's a criticism that I think shouldn't be there. I think, again, from Dame Eilish, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but the IOPC in England and Wales is either a mixture of police and non-police background staff, senior management, and her recommendation is the PIRC should move towards that situation. We haven't done that. For what reason, I don't know. I appreciate it would need to be a gradual change, but if we have people from a non-police background within as investigators and as deputy senior investigators, why do we not have that independence, that sounding board, for want of a better phrase, to have within senior management, to be there to ensure our independence and to make sure that we are not unconsciously biased towards any organisation or any policing body within Scotland.
And do you think that the makeup of PIRC could impact public confidence into the independence of the organisation when investigating deaths following police contact?
I think it leaves us open to criticism, a criticism that shouldn't or doesn't need to be there, and that's for the recruitment process. Due to recent appointments, the chance of that improving in the near future, I would suggest, is quite slim from a career point of view of those people there. And it's, again, if we have that mixture within the investigations and the DSIs, why do we not have that ASI and above?
And could the makeup of the organisation, in your view, impact the confidence that the family of a deceased person might have that the investigation is truly independent of the police?
I think that it's a challenge that, as you know, I often referred to as a retired police officer. I'm not a retired police officer. I did serve with Strathclyde Police for 30 years. My role is a deputy senior investigator now, and I'm a family liaison officer, or have been trained as a family liaison officer. That is my role. It does. I have had families in the past and up to quite recently question the fact that we're police officers, but I've explained to them the independence, and quite recently with investigations we have had families thank us for being there, and our independence, and demonstrating our independence by the quality of the report and the findings that we've had and been able to share with them.
Can I share with you the evidence that Colette Bell gave to the inquiry on the 9th of February of last year? This won't come up on the screen,
Okay.
but it's a short passage and I'll read it out to you, and then we'll go back to what is on the screen. She was asked to explain a little bit about her concerns in connection with the PIRC. And she said, "I think I'd lost all trust in the police at this point, and I didn't really want anything to do with the police or PIRC, because I thought they're all made up of ex-police officers and they're supposed to be independent, but how independent can you be if it's all ex-officers that make up PIRC? It's not really transparent if it's the police investigating the police." Do you wish to comment on that?
It's certainly something, I can't remember if she actually said anything like that towards me personally. Had she done so, I think I'm confident that I could have allayed any of those fears. Personally speaking, as a family liaison officer, I would have preferred more interaction with the immediate family, and I'm confident again I could have explained the circumstances, and her perception is that they're all retired police officers. That's not the case. Even back then it was not the case, so I had that ability to and that confidence to clarify that situation.
I am aware that you have expressed the view that you would have liked to have had more contact with the family.
Yes.
That's something that we will be exploring in detail, possibly not today, but possibly into the second day of your evidence. But hearing what Colette Bell had to say, and knowing yourself the makeup of PIRC as an organisation, do you feel any sympathy for her position?
I understand what she's saying, but again, I'm confident, as I said, I could have explained that with more interaction with herself and the rest of the family.
Can we go back to paragraph 33 of your statement, please? We might need to scroll up a little. You mention, sorry, we might have to go down a little bit now, the retirement of the head of investigations. And you say, second bottom line, since the retirement, the situation has not improved but significantly worsened and is male-dominated. I see this as a disadvantage to the PIRC, and it has hindered the progress of female staff, those from a non-police background and those who've been through our trainee programme. Can you expand on that?
In what way?
In what sense have things significantly worsened?
Again, it's not having that. Well, an example I can give you is that having been the flow coordinator, there was a time when our flow cadre was very much male dominated, and I highlighted that in several occasions to senior management that it's something that had to be addressed. It's something that you can't address very quickly because you volunteer to be a family liaison officer. You can't be told, or you should not be told, you're going to be a family liaison officer. I've experienced from within Strathclyde Police and within the PIRC where some people have volunteered for the course and have then subsequently found out it's not for them when they step away from it. That's perfectly understandable. It is a demanding role, and that example of getting that diversity, that mixture of staff is beneficial not only in that role but throughout the organisation.
So what is it then that's significantly worsened? Is it the proportion of former police officers within the organisation in general, or perhaps within the more senior ranks, or is it to do with gender balance within the organisation?
It's gender balance, but you also have, again, a criticism from Dame Ailish was the number of senior officers, retired senior officers within management, and that is the situation at this moment in time within PIRC. It is all made up of senior officers, former senior officers within, or former senior officers, police officers. There will always be a need for that, I think. There's, again, just that you always need to have that understanding of police procedures at that strategic level, but again, the IOPC in England and Wales don't have that, and they work perfectly well. So I personally think we should have more of a mixture of female staff and staff from a non-police background.
Okay. And how has this lack of diversity, if I can call it that, hindered the progress of female staff, those from a non-police background and those who've come through your trainee programme?
Again, the line management within investigations, out of, I think it's about 20 line managers, up to and including the Director of Operations, only 2 are female.
Let's move away from this subject, and I want to ask you more questions about being a flow in a general sense. Am I right to understand that being a flow is not a full-time role? It's an additional responsibility that you take on as an investigator?
Yes, it's like a scene manager, somebody who's an expert in firearms, or somebody who's an expert in officer safety training. You have been trained to have a skill, or you've been identified and selected and attended some form of training course to take up that role. But it's not a full-time. You do not do family liaison all the time. From a welfare point of view, that just simply wouldn't be a good idea.
So it's an additional skill
Yes.
that you have, that you bring to bear in your work as an investigator. Yes. And is that the case both within the police and within the PIRC, that it's not a full-time role?
Yes.
Thinking about policing here, in what sorts of case would a flow be deployed within the police?
The same as a PIRC flow, it would be predominantly death investigations, whether that be a death in custody or a death following police contact, as it's now referred to, but also if there was a serious incident whereby it was beneficial to have a flow in place to liaise with the family, and between a conduit between the family and the senior investigating officer. If there was if it wasn't a death but there was a significant amount of media interest, it would be beneficial to keep the family updated, communicating with them as much as possible.
I was going to ask in what types of case the PIRC would deploy a flow, but you said in response to my last question that it's much of a muchness as between the police and the PIRC when a flow would be deployed.
Predominantly it's a death. We would deploy flows for a death, but we have deployed flows for circumstances I've just described whereby there's been a serious injury and it's been beneficial to have a flow in place. Sometimes, again, each case is looked at individually. Sometimes it's good to have a flow in there and then the job has been done and the flow can step back from it. Vice versa, an investigation can start and a flow is not required, but then later on in the investigation it is established that we need that conduit between the family and the organisation.
What do you have to do to become a flow? Is there an application process, an interview?
There is, certainly when it's still the case today, I say you volunteer for it. When I did it, it was very much like a promotion panel. I was interviewed by somebody from a senior officer from personnel, a senior officer from road policing at the time, and another member of staff in relation to diversity. And you were very much asked, or you had to provide that you had the information or the capabilities and the communication skills to get or take on that role. Once you had completed that, if you were successful, you would then be allocated a family liaison officer course at that time up at the Scottish Police College, which was a 5-day course.
5 days, okay. And what skill set or personal qualities make for a good flow?
Sometimes you need to be a good listener, good communication skills. You need to be able to speak to people. I've lost count the amount of times where you go to get a statement from the family and they basically want to tell you about their loved one. That might take all, you might spend the whole day there and come away and not achieved what you set out to do. That's what you have to do. If they want to tell you the lifestyle of their loved one, then you listen to that. That in itself is good information to receive, and you can incorporate that information into a statement at a later course, but sometimes you just need to simply sit there and listen. Amongst other things, I've been subject to verbal abuse, I've been assaulted, but it's all through emotion. It's not, there is no intent to cause me any injury, but it's having that ability to step back and understand the emotions and the anger and the frustration of any family involved in that situation. I think it's something you have to remember in any of these situations. It is a traumatic situation for any family, irrespective of what the circumstances have been.
And I want to ask you about the training that flows receive. You mentioned there being a 5-day course, and the PIRC have confirmed in a position statement that all flows, whether they're from the police or from the PIRC, undergo the same accredited national training course.
Yes.
And that was 5 days, you said?
Yes.
Okay. Is there follow-up or refresher training?
There's you have a regular, or annually, there's a family liaison officers conference which is held at the Scottish Police College, but also from our point of view, I've been over to Dublin for similar conference days, and that is predominantly, it could be it is a training day because you will have case studies in relation to family liaison, some of the high profile investigations that we'll all have seen on the news. You'll have seen that on the news, but the case study goes into more detail about the challenges for the families and for the SIO. So that's a good training day, for want of a better word, and also you get the opportunity to network with fellow colleagues from within the police and other independent investigative authorities, and with family members who have expressed their experiences, good and bad, with family liaison officers.
So we've spoken about a family liaison officer. What then is a family liaison coordinator?
Predominantly it's my job to, as a coordinator, is to, if we have a death investigation, it's my job to select that family liaison officer, and I need to be given the information, or I get the information as to the brief circumstances. And depending on the circumstances of that death, it's my job to select the person suitable and taking into account welfare, annual leave, the day-to-day impact on that person, and do they have the experience, the knowledge, and the ability to take on that role, whether that be as the lead investigator or to be shadowed by a more experienced. Because at the end of the day, or the way I worked it was that when you qualified as a family liaison officer, you didn't automatically become a lead flow. You would be shadowed or mentored by a more experienced family liaison officer who would be there as to pass on his experience or her experience to those who were just through their course.
What do you have to do to become a family liaison coordinator?
I think at the time I did it, it was a 2-day course within Strathclyde Police, but I believe it is now a 3-day course. Again, the national standard training course.
And is being a family liaison coordinator a full-time role?
No, it's another role I have within Strathclyde Police and within the PIRC. So if there is, I must say, if there's a requirement for the flow, the DSI or the senior investigator will come to me and I will allocate that person.
How many flows are there within the PIRC today?
I think it's about 11 or 12 at the moment.
How many are female?
5, I think.
5 out of 11.
I think we're about 50%, 50-50.
Okay. How many are not white?
None.
And within the cadre of investigators, how many investigators approximately are there within the PIRC?
In total, including line management, probably about 60, 65, I think.
And how many are female?
Well, I'd be guessing. I would need to sit down and look through the...
All right, I'm sure we can find that information elsewhere. Are you able to comment on how many are not white?
Are not white? There's none.
None. I want to ask you some questions about your experience as a flow. When did you become a flow?
2001, I think, 2001, 2002, round about there. It was just after the role had been created.
And you explain in your second statement, this is paragraph 2, that this was 5 days at the Scottish Police College where you looked at scenarios, high-profile investigations, and there were inputs from experienced officers and from families. Did that initial training include any equality and diversity issues that you might encounter as a flow?
Yes, it did.
What did it cover?
Diversity, I think it's now referred to as unconscious bias. I don't remember it being referred to as that back then. It might have been implicit bias, but it was having an awareness of society and those who, different families, different backgrounds.
So the training that you had more than 20 years ago now included unconscious or implicit bias training.
And also the course, I said, another 5-day course. Again, it was a families and officer, I believe, families and coordinators course over at Dublin. Same sort of standard, and you touched on case studies. Stephen Lawrence, in particular, was the one in Dublin.
When was the Dublin course?
2016, I think it was.
So after the events of May 2015?
Yes. But that type of case study would still, I do remember getting that type of input in my initial families and officers course.
And what did you learn about guarding against unconscious bias from your initial training?
You have to be open-minded because you're dealing with people from all walks of life.
And beyond keeping an open mind, did you learn any strategies or techniques to equip yourself to avoid unconscious bias from influencing your decisions or your thoughts?
I don't remember any specific strategies, but you know, you did have scenario-based discussions as to what would you do and what was right and what was wrong. Sometimes there was no right or wrong answer. It's all about liaising with the family, communicating with the family, and managing their expectations of what you're doing. So no two families are the same. Some families want nothing to do with you from the very outset, and then they're on the phone every single day. Some families want contact every single day. Some people don't want to know about you until you've completed the investigation. And that's where your job is managing how the family want that. And if the family decide to change their expectations or what they expect, then that has to be managed as well.
Bear with me a moment. So I'm mindful that it's 11:30, and I wonder if this would be a convenient time to take our break.
Yes, we'll have a 20-minute break now. Ms. Thompson.
Before the break, I was asking questions about your initial training to become a flow with Strathclyde Police. And I wondered, following that initial 5-day course, whether you had any follow-up or refresher training aside from the annual conferences that you've mentioned already.
There's no refresher training in relation to the course.
When was it that you became a family liaison coordinator?
Maybe a year or a couple of years after being a flow.
So early 2000s.
Yeah, probably. 2003, maybe 2004. Can't remember exactly, but around about then.
You say in your statement that the training for that particular role was over 2 days.
At the time, I think it was 2 days, but it's now 3 days.
What did that training cover? How did the training differ from the training to be a flow?
It's the selection. You're trained, or you receive inputs about the selection of staff, their welfare, their well-being. Part of my role, excuse me, I'm not their supervisor. I'm their coordinator in relation to the flow. So annually, it's my job to make sure that they receive vicarious trauma interviews for their well-being. It's my job to make sure they are not deployed on a regular basis, but I have to look at their workload, the circumstances of the deployment. Are they suitable for it? Have they had any bereavements within their own family network? All these is my job to liaise with that, and at least twice a year have a meeting with all the flows in relation to ongoing issues or learning outcomes from their deployments.
Now, you retired in 2010 from
Yes.
the police. Do you recall what month you retired?
October.
And you joined the PIRC in 2013.
Yes.
Again, what month did you join the PIRC?
I think I was offered the job the end of February, but officially started in beginning of March, early March, 5th of March, I think it was.
So there was a gap of something in the region of 2.5 years
Yes.
between you retiring from the police and taking up your position with the PIRC. Initially as an investigator, flow and flow coordinator, and then more recently as a deputy senior investigator and flow coordinator.
Yes.
So you were a flow from the point of your appointment as an investigator with the PIRC, and I'm interested to know whether you had any training or refresher training when you joined the PIRC, bearing in mind that you'd been out of that role for some 2.5 years.
In that time, prior to the 1st of April, when Police Scotland and ourselves officially became organisations, we had in-house training scenarios. How would we respond? What the logistics of our response to death, firearms incident, a road traffic collision, whatever it was, over that period of 5-6 weeks.
And did those discussions encompass the deployment of flows in the event of an incident?
Yes.
When asked in your second statement, at paragraph 5, we don't need it on the screen, thank you, about your record of training, you said that you had a development day in September of 2015 and a 5-day family liaison coordinators course in March of 2016 through the PIRC.
Yes.
So that was the training that you had with the PIRC. In relation to your role as a flow, did you receive any formal flow-specific training beyond the scenarios and strategies that were discussed as the PIRC came into being in early 2013?
In that period before the 1st of April?
Or in the period before May of 2015? Both of the courses that are referenced in your statement post-date the death of Sheku Bayo.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to know whether you had any formal flow-specific training through the PIRC between the date that you joined and Mr Bayo's death.
Only it'd be the National Flow Conference up at the Scottish Police College. The specific date I couldn't remember, but that was an annual event, so we were offered spaces to attend that.
So this is the annual conference you've told us about
Yes.
already, and I think you explain in your statement that PIRC flows were invited to go
Yes.
along to that course, although it was run by Police Scotland.
Yes.
In your statement, and the reference is paragraph 3 of your second statement, you describe implementing a mentoring scheme within the PIRC as part of your role as a family liaison coordinator, whereby a less experienced flow will be deployed alongside a more experienced flow to get on the job training. I wondered whether that model existed when you were in the police. Do you have that opportunity to learn from more experienced colleagues?
Yes. Ideally, you would deploy 2 flows to a death investigation. That's twofold. It creates a situation that should a flow go on annual leave, sickness leave, whatever it was, you had somebody else who knew and had interacted with the family, so you had a backup effectively. But part of that is that, especially within PIRC, we had at one end of the scale a vast amount of experience, and then there's a large gap to those who had just recently been trained and had little or no experience after have been trained. So I took it upon myself to identify the fact, as I did within Strathclyde Police, was that a newly trained flow would not be deployed as a lead investigator or a lead flow. He or she would have somebody of more experience to be there to shadow and to mentor them, and then that would happen for until I was happy that that person, and was receiving feedback that that person was capable of dealing with the role themselves as lead. And by doing so, I was increasing the knowledge and the experience of those who had just been trained to give them more experience, but also maintaining the experience and the skills of those who were experienced by shadowing and mentoring.
Can we bring up your second inquiry statement, please, and look at paragraphs 24 and 26? You've mentioned this in passing in your evidence already, but I'd like to ask you more questions about this. So if we could perhaps begin by looking at paragraph 24, where you explain another responsibility that you had, particularly when your numbers increased to about 12 flows, was 2 or 3 times a year, no less than twice a year, you would have a meeting off-site with all the flows, and you would discuss any kind of learning outcomes from any deployment, any updates in relation to policy, an opportunity for people to speak freely as to any issues they may or may not have in relation to deployments. That was my job to get all that information and then feed it back into senior management. It was my job to coordinate any kind of issues, identify any learning outcome, and make sure that, sorry, if you could scroll please, and make sure that we moved forward and improved the service that we have within the organisation. These meetings probably started about 2014 when our flow numbers increased from 3 to 6. I wanted to ask you about this. Did you find these meetings to be helpful?
Yes.
Can you give examples of the sorts of learning outcomes that were discussed at these meetings?
We did, well, initially when there was only 3 of us, it was more of an informal meeting because there was only 3 of us. And likewise when the numbers increased to 6, excuse me, again it was be more informal. However, when the numbers increased to about 12, it was actually a colleague of mine who suggested minutes. We kept minutes, which we did do, and it was a good idea. But something that jumps to the top of my head as an example is a flow who had no experience of repatriating deceased to another country or back down to England, had no experience of that and had no knowledge, as did the majority of flows at that time. So that was a good learning experience for everybody. I had experience in that, but I used that as an opportunity for him to express his learning outcomes and what he had learned from it and what he didn't know prior to that, and where to tap into that information.
And how was this learning then cascaded?
To the flows there at the time. Not everybody could make it, but the majority of the time all the flows were there. and those who weren't, I would speak to them in relation to that. If I knew it was somebody who didn't have that experience, I would pass on that information. And also things like if the flow policy was being updated or looked at, or whatever stage it was, then I would keep them aware of where it was and what stage it was at.
And if we could go back up just a little bit, please. You say that it was your job to get all that information and then feed it back into senior management, this being the learning outcomes and issues that Flows had had in relation to deployments. What was the process by which you fed that information back into the organisation?
I would speak to the SIs, or as an investigator, it would be the DSIs, the senior investigators, and the head of investigations, and I would make them aware of issues. Again, another one that sort of jumps to mind is Flows who felt they were not being given the information to do their job, and I would highlight that and what the processes was. Unfortunately, it's nothing new since I've been doing it since 2004. The same issue's still there. You continually have to give certain people or managers a nudge as to what should be happening, what the process is in relation to deployment of Flows, and what they should be getting told, and how important the role is in relation to any investigation.
You say that some of the same issues are still recurring 20 years later.
From a personal point of view, yes.
Yes. Do you continue to coordinate these meetings?
No, I stood back from the role in May last year.
Has someone else taken the mantle?
Yes.
Okay. So these meetings continue to happen, it's just no longer you who coordinates them.
I'm not aware of what the situation is at the moment. I certainly haven't heard of any of the Flows going for meetings in relation to that.
So when did you stop doing this personally?
May last year.
May of last year?
Yes.
So you're not aware of any of these meetings taking place since you stepped down
No,
in May of last
well,
year?
I mean, although I've stepped down for the role, I am still a trained family liaison officer.
Sure.
So I've very much stepped away from family liaison coordination. So if I was required, or there was a need for me to step in and even to assist the current flow coordinator, I've been more than happy to do that, because I have the training and the experience and the knowledge. And irrespective of what organisation you're in, if you have that knowledge there, you must tap into it to use it for the benefit of the investigation and for the family. So, but officially I am not the flow coordinator.
But since May of 2023, as a flow, you haven't been invited to go along to one of these meetings?
No, when there's a flow in my team and he hasn't been invited to. I'm not aware of him, or he has not attended any meetings.
Do you have any knowledge of a meeting having taken place since you stepped down in May of last year?
Not to my knowledge, no.
You were asked, paragraph 7 of this statement, although we don't need to look at it, how many times you were deployed as a flow during your career, and you said into the hundreds. Are you able to say how many cases you've been deployed in that concerned a death following police contact?
How many death following police contact?
Yes.
I couldn't put a number on it. I don't think it's healthy to keep that sort of stats personally. I'm sure if went back over the years, somebody somewhere would be able to find it. An example I can give you is that my route to work is 40 minutes, and I pass a location of 12 road death investigations every day that I've been involved in. So that gives you an idea as to the frequency that I've been involved, either as a reporting officer, a family liaison officer, or a senior investigating officer. So if somebody's keeping, my personal opinion, if somebody's keeping a tally of the amount of deployments they've had, that would be a cause for concern for me.
And are you able to help us understand if there's a distinction to be drawn between a death following police contact and a death in police custody? Are you able to say how many death in police custody cases you've been involved with?
No, I couldn't put I wouldn't be able to put a number on that, but it's over, if you take into account 30 years with Strathclyde Police and 11 years, almost 11 years exactly with the PIRC. It will be into the hundreds, again, either as the reporting officer, a family liaison officer, or a senior investigating officer.
Can we look at your first statement, please, for a moment? And if we can find paragraph 16 of that statement, please. We've spoken at some length about your training and your experience, and you were asked if, as at the 3rd of May of 2015, sorry, this is not the paragraph I am looking for. Bear with me just a moment. I've possibly given you the wrong statement in reference. I'm so sorry. Yes, I'm sorry. That's my mistake. It's actually your second statement, not your first statement. Right paragraph, wrong statement. While that's being brought up on the screen, you were asked the question, did you feel adequately trained and experienced to carry out your role as at May of 2015? Here we are, we have it now. And you said, yes, I had no issues at all. I have liaised with families from all backgrounds through society, race, religion, gender. Unfortunately, I've had to explain to families information that they were not aware about their loved one. I have many years of liaising with families from all sorts of backgrounds, all sorts of areas within society. So yes, in my opinion, I was prepared for dealing with the incident with Shekobayo on the 3rd of May. So you felt that you had the skill set, the training and the experience to take on the role of Flo in May of 2015.
Yes.
I want to ask you some questions now about the on-call arrangements back in 2015. We know that you were appointed as Flo at the 9 o'clock briefing on the 4th of May
Yes.
of 2015. Mr. Bayo died shortly after 9 o'clock in the morning of the 3rd, so your appointment came more or less 24 hours
Yes.
after his death. Now, we understand that you were not on call over the weekend.
That's correct.
How many Flows did PIRC have back in May of 2015?
6,
6.
including myself.
And back then, how many were female of those 6?
1, I think. Yeah, 1.
And were any not white?
No.
Would you have expected there to be a PIRC Flow on call over a weekend?
At that time, well, the numbers of flows, again, it's a welfare. There's an on-call rota, which at the moment, because of the number of teams within the organisation, runs about every 9 weeks you're on call. Now, I would suggest probably just about every team has a flow on their team. Is it a specific requirement or a need? No, I don't think so. It never has been. I've been promoted to DSI. I have had numerous needs to. I've been called out on numerous occasions, and if I didn't have a flow, it was a phone call, either by myself or a member of my team was instructed to call out additional staff, and if it was a flow or a scene manager, that was their job.
So you're referring to additional staff who were not on call, but would be contacted and asked if they could be recalled to duty?
Yes, it was always a job. My personal opinion, it was probably a job for one of the investigators to sit down if I needed that resource. But at that time there was 6 of us. So again, from a welfare point of view, you would have every 6 weeks potentially, and if annual leave kicked in or somebody was sick leave, you could potentially have a flow on call every single week, which from their welfare and family point of view, I didn't think that was an acceptable rota.
But you would nonetheless have expected the SI to have made contact with flows who were not on call if there was a need for a flow to be deployed over a weekend or out of hours.
Yeah, again, like myself, if I needed a flow and I didn't have one in the team, then it's a phone call. Out of now 12, and I would be confident I would get a flow.
Can we bring up your second inquiry statement again, please, and have a look at paragraph 45? Which confirms, I think, what you've just said in your evidence. Bottom half of that paragraph, in my experience, when there has not been a floor scene manager in the on-call team, and you explained earlier in your evidence that a scene manager is another specialism, you're first and foremost an investigator, but you could also be a scene manager. In my experience, when there's not been a floor scene manager in the on-call team, telephone call to a suitably qualified member of staff resolves that situation, and those colleagues can turn out for the investigation. Have you yourself, in your role as a flow, ever been contacted over the weekend when you've not been on call and asked if you could deploy as a
Yes.
flow? How many times has that happened?
Over 11 years, probably into double figures. I couldn't again, it's something, some people like to keep that sort of tally, I don't.
Just to have a ballpark and an idea of whether we're talking about something that is exceptional or something that happens routinely.
It's not routinely, it depends on the circumstances.
And on the occasions that you were called, were you able to recall yourself to duty and be deployed?
Yes,
On every occasion?
yes.
Can we look at paragraph 46, please? And this, I think, is you speaking with your senior investigating or your deputy senior investigators hat on here. I've been asked if that means if a death in custody or following police contact occurred outside of working hours. If I were the on-call individual, I would be thinking, do I have any flows that are on call at the moment, or is there anyone I can contact? Yes. You get the initial briefing from Police Scotland with the circumstances. Sometimes it is very limited as to what you do know. If there's a death following police contact or a death in custody, you're thinking about a flow. Do I need a flow? Do I need a flow right here and now? Do I need a scene manager? I have been there when I've had no flow, no scene managers, so I will telephone these people out or get a member of staff to phone people out on my behalf. To a certain extent, when you get an initial phone call from a practical point of view, Police Scotland invariably will have a gold group meeting as to how they're going to deal with the incident and respond. I look upon that time as a good opportunity to assess what do I need to respond to the incident and make these phone calls so that when I or anybody from senior management is sitting in on that gold group meeting, I know that their resources are attending or are available to me to deal with the incident. It's a lot easier to scale down rather than try to scale up. Every single incident has to be looked at on an individual basis. So here you're sharing your experience as being a deputy senior investigator, I think, and one who is potentially on call over a weekend. There is an incident, you need a flow or potentially a scene manager, and you're explaining that it would be your practice if you assess that you need that person right here, right now. You'd go through the list of people who were not on call but held the relevant skill set.
Yes.
And you would phone around until you got someone.
Yes,
Is that
it's
right?
not specifically related to families and officers or scene managers. If there was a firearms incident, there are staff within the organisation who have a firearms training background. I'd be looking for one of them to turn out to assist with the processes that Police Scotland have to adhere to. So it's not limited to flows. It's a case of assessing what has happened and what do I need to do my job.
So you're looking at what specialisms you need.
If need be, yes.
Yeah. And a flow could be one,
Yeah.
scene manager could be another, firearms might be
Yes.
a third. Can we look at paragraph 44, please? Here you were asked if you were ever contacted out of hours when you were not on call to assist with an investigation, and we've discussed this already. You say every time I've been contacted, I've turned out. That weekend, I think you're referring here to the weekend of Shekabau's death. That weekend I was busy from a personal point of view, but it is not the first time that has happened. Whether I am on or off call, I have turned out for investigations, so I see no reason why I would not have turned out had I been contacted. So should the chair understand that if you had been called on Sunday the 3rd of May of 2015 and asked to deploy as a flow, you would have been willing to do so?
Yes, I know exactly what I was doing that weekend, and I was at home, so I could easily have turned out, yes.
And were you called?
No.
Are you surprised that you weren't called?
I wasn't aware of, I wasn't paying attention to what, if there was anything in the news at that time. I wasn't paying attention to what was going on. Quite honest, we're in the middle of building the house, so that was my priority that weekend. So, but again, had I been given the phone call, yes, I would have turned it.
And the following day, when you got to the office and found out what had happened the previous day, were you surprised that no one had tried to get in touch with you?
I don't say I was surprised, but I was anticipating a flow deployment in relation to the circumstances.
Did PIRC have a number to contact you on when you were off duty?
Yes, we have a work mobile and obviously a personal mobile and a landline to the house. So there is a list of all contact numbers for staff within within investigations.
If you had been contacted on the 3rd of May, how quickly could you have deployed? How quickly could you have got yourself to Kirkcaldy?
Abiding by the speed limits, an hour. 40 minutes, or an hour. But to get to the office is 35 minutes on a good day, 35 minutes, 40 minutes for me to get there. So I would be at the office within the hour, as I've done in the past.
Sorry, when you say the office, is that the PIRC office in Hamilton? Yeah. But if you had been required to make your way to Kirkcaldy, where things were happening, how quickly could you have got there?
I would need, well, again, I would need to go to the office to uplift a company car and then to Kirkcaldy. So, best case scenario, maybe just over a couple of hours, 2.5 hours. I think it's about an hour and a bit from the office to Kirkcaldy.
Okay, I see, I understand. So you would have had to go to the office first to
Yes.
collect a company car. Would you have had to do anything else to prepare yourself for the deployment, or would you only be going into Hamilton to uplift the car?
I would be expecting, I would either have received some sort of briefing over the phone as to what was expected of me, or I would have received a briefing at the office, or again, if it was a case of staff had gone to Kirkcaldy ahead of me, I would expect in my arrival at Kirkcaldy some sort of briefing either from PIRC staff or from police officers involved with contact with the family.
We heard some evidence yesterday from Keith Harrower about the need for a flow to be thoroughly briefed before being deployed. But in terms of the practicalities of making yourself available for the deployment, beyond getting to Hamilton to uplift a company car, was there anything else that you would have had to do? Is there any sort of kit that you need to take, or was it just the car that you needed?
I would have my own, statement papers, the PIRC leaflets that we've discussed before. I would have a number of them, contact cards. So that's all I would need to make contact with the family. I don't need any specialist equipment to deal with that.
And the leaflets and the contact cards, are they things that you keep at home, or are they all in the office?
I've got them in my bag. I've got them in my bag today. So
Okay.
I've always got them.
So the only thing that you would have needed from Hamilton was the company car?
Company car and either a briefing there or, as I say, at Kirkcaldy Police Office.
And would there have been a need for the company car? Would it have been possible for you to have taken your own car and made your way directly to Kirkcaldy, or would that be frowned upon for one reason or another?
It's not frowned upon. Some people do have the insurance to cover that. I don't.
Okay. So there would have been a legal requirement, if you like,
to
pick up
yes.
the company car. And you said it would have taken, I think you said 35, 40 minutes to get to Hamilton?
Yes.
Collect the car, and then from Hamilton to Kirkcaldy would take roughly how long?
I think it's about an hour and 15 minutes.
So all in all, about 2 hours.
2.5 hours, yeah.
2 to 2.5 hours from the point of the phone call, if the phone call had come.
Yes, that's me obviously getting ready, getting out, getting suited and booted, so to speak, and presentable to the family,
Sure.
and getting there and picking up a car and getting on the road.
Sure. And there would, of course, have required to have been time for the briefing and so on, but in terms
Yes.
of the physical logistics on the ground, if you like, it would have taken you about 2 to 2.5 hours
Yes.
from the point of receiving a call to get yourself to
Yes.
Kirkcaldy Police Office, had you been requested to deploy. I'd like to ask you in a moment to look at the statement of retired Chief Superintendent Gary McEwen. It's SBPI 00258. While that's coming up on the screen, Sorry, I'm going to go back and just ask you another question in relation to deployment. If you had been called later on in the day, let's say after 8 o'clock, 8:15 in the evening, would you still have been in a position to deploy?
It would again, it's the family's wishes. So if the family, I know Keith Harrow was there with, I think, Alec Maguire speaking to the family. So if the family wanted to speak to a family liaison officer, even if that was just by phone call to explain, identify myself and provide contact details, I could have done that. If the family, and this has happened to me before, at that sort of time of night, the family do want to speak to me, and I have attended, and it has been late at night, early hours in the morning, and to explain that, to be quite clear, that sort of contact is really just a first contact. Here's my contact details, here's what I can do. I think I said to Addy at the time when I did make contact that the company phone would be on from 8 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night. That doesn't mean to say I was going to answer the phone at 10 o'clock at night, but by all means leave a voicemail. So that contact, I could have established that contact in that initial phone call if that was required. If the family wanted to speak to me at that time, I would have explained to them, this is how long it's going to take me to get there, and I would have attended, yes.
So if you'd been called in the evening of the 3rd, say around 8:15, you would have been willing and able to deploy.
Yes.
And that could have been done in one of two ways. You could have made yourself physically available to meet with the family, allowing for the fact that would have taken two
Yes.
to 2.5 hours to get to Kirkcaldy, then there would have been the requirement for a briefing.
Yes.
But you've also suggested an alternative is that you could have made contact with the family by phone,
Yes.
presumably after having had a briefing by
Yes.
telephone
Yes.
yourself.
Yes. I wouldn't. I would need information, some sort of information. Depending, even if it was very limited information, I would still need that. And if again in the past where police Scotland flows have been deployed, I've been needing to speak to them before I spoke to the family.
I was going to ask you to look at the statement of retired Chief Superintendent Gary McEwen, SBPI 00258. He was the local policing commander for Fife on the 3rd of May and Silver Command with responsibility for community impact after the critical incident was declared. Now, he gave evidence that he went to visit Mr. Bio's family on the evening of the 3rd of May, and we're going to talk about that in due course. But in his statement, he explains the background to him making the decision to go to visit the family, and that was at paragraphs 86 and 87. I'm going to read these out and then invite your comment on certain things that were said by Mr. McEwen. The background to this is important because by the time I got involved with the family directly, there was already a great deal of anger and upset. PIRC were responsible for family liaison. My point of contention in this case is that they weren't dealing with it properly. I felt like I needed to see the family because it wasn't at the forefront of PIRC's mind. On the day in question, they didn't have the flows out. They weren't even on duty. That wasn't good enough. I raised that a couple of times directly with PIRC. Their recommendation was, it's fine, we'll see them tomorrow. I disagreed. I said we can't leave the family overnight. If they needed to be briefed and made aware, it was wholly inappropriate. Can I invite your comment on what he says there, and in particular his statement that on the day in question, PIRC didn't have the flows out, they weren't even on duty, it wasn't good enough.
I think Mr. McEwen at that time lacked enough knowledge about what we could or could not do. I think from a personal point of view, if I was the only person who could have turned out as a flow or as an investigator, I could have directed Police Scotland as to what to do until the team had arrived. So I would suggest he has a lack of knowledge at that time of what our organisation could do and was capable of. We work from Hamilton, we cover the whole of Scotland for all policing bodies within Scotland. So the logistics of that is discussed. From Keith Harrow's point of view, I think he did the right thing by going to speak to the family. I can't remember what time of the day it was. And the timeline as to whether that was the appropriate time or not, but he did go and speak to them, and my understanding is that he told them that, you know, as a flow, would be in contact on Monday. So I think he's misinformed, to be honest.
Let's look at paragraph 87 too. PIRC couldn't muster flows and said they couldn't deploy until the following day, which I thought was wholly unacceptable. I can't remember which PIRC officer did this. Keith Harrower was my main point of contact in the early stages, so I'm guessing it was probably Keith that told me that. PIRC weren't keen on deploying Police Scotland flows. That was their decision to make. I understood that and why they made that decision. It's not good practice to have one flow on the Saturday and another on the Sunday. The preferred model is to have an agreed flow and have them right in from the off. That provides consistency and builds trust. The PIRC preference was to have one on the following day. For me, waiting 24 hours before the family had been given a thorough, proper update on the circumstances was inappropriate. If I was my family, and so I think it should be if it was my family and there was concern about the circumstances and I wasn't being told for 24 hours, it would be devastating. Again, can I just invite your comment on that paragraph in general terms, and then there are one or two passages I'd like to seek your specific comment on.
From Monday morning when I arrived at the office, my understanding was that Police Scotland flows had been deployed, and that it was Mr McEwen who cancelled PIRC flows. His rationale for that, I'm not aware of. I think I had a conversation, it was a question I asked why they'd been stood down, and I'm sure Keith told me it was Mr McEwen that had stood them down. The rationale for that I don't understand. Again, from experience both within Strathclyde Police and as within the PIRC, taking into account the locality or where this incident happened in the locality of family home addresses. What was of paramount importance from Police Scotland's point of view is the delivery of the death message, and me personally, I would have had flows in very, very quickly after a proper briefing of the full circumstances. But the death message always has been and always will be, will lie with Police Scotland. It's something that was of paramount importance to me as an SIO within road policing, and I have experience of dealing with deaths at the families, effectively their road end. So the importance of getting that death message to the family, closely followed by family liaison officers, is of paramount importance.
Can I just clarify something with you, please, Mr Lewis? You said, speaking personally, I would have had flows in very quickly. When you make that statement, are you wearing your policing hat or your PIRC hat?
No, it's a. You want this. There is feedback from courses over the years. Family feedback is that delivering the death message should be somebody who is not a flow, is not going to be their flows, because the family feedback has been that every time the flows turn up, all they see is the person who delivered the death message, the message that has destroyed their world. So it has been taken on board that ideally you would like somebody who has been properly selected and given a proper briefing in relation to deliver a death message, with the opportunity to either provide details of a contact officer or somebody within management, within the police or within PIRC, closely followed by somebody's going to contact you in relation to family liaison. So what Keith did on that day, he went and visited the family. He probably didn't know who would or would not be the flow on the Monday, but there would have been a flow in contact that day.
At the beginning of that paragraph, Mr McEwen says, PIRC couldn't muster flows and said they couldn't deploy until the following day, which I thought was wholly unacceptable. Can I invite your comment on that?
That's always a conversation he's had with Keith. That's his opinion, but as I say, all I can say is that had I been phoned that day, yes, I could have turned out.
And further down, it's not good practice to have one flow on the Saturday and another on the Sunday. The preferred model is to have an agreed flow and have them right from the off. That provides consistency and builds trust. Can I invite your comment on that?
I don't know Mr McEwen's training or whether he's trained as a family liaison officer, but I would agree. I certainly And I don't think anybody within PIRC, any line manager at that time, and even certainly to this day, would deploy a flow one day and then deploy another flow the following day. That just wouldn't happen. I could see the family be provided with a contact name and phone number initially, and if that would be Keith Harrower or somebody else within the organisation on this occasion, that would be acceptable, with the understanding that the following day a family liaison officer would be appointed.
So can I just understand what you're saying, Mr. Lewis? Are you saying that the Police Scotland flows should not have been even contemplated for deployment?
No, I'm not saying that at all, my Lord. It's a death following Police Scotland, a death in custody. So yeah, I'd expected flows to have been deployed.
And you would expect Police Scotland flows to be deployed?
Yes.
Right, thank you.
So, Mr. Lewis, we've looked at Gary McEwen's position as set out in his inquiry statement, which was that PIRC were responsible for family liaison, couldn't muster, couldn't deploy, and that was wholly unacceptable. I would like now to share with you what Mr. Harrower has said over the last day or so in his evidence. This won't come up on the screen because it's from the transcript of the evidence, but I'll read it out to you. In his evidence, he was taken to one of his inquiry statements and read a paragraph from his statement. In a PIRC investigation, there would be a firm expectation that Police Scotland family liaison officers were deployed. Then, if there was a need for PIRC flows to be deployed, then that would potentially be a day or two after. I can't be more specific than that because it will depend on the circumstances, and a lot of communication and dialogue would need to take place between the PIRC appointed flows and the Police Scotland flows, but a definite expectation that Police Scotland flows would be deployed first. And Senior Counsel said, you seem to be saying here in your inquiry statement there was a firm expectation, a definite expectation on the part of PIRC, or on the part of you, that the Police Scotland flows would be deployed initially. And he said in his evidence at that time, yes. Can I invite your comment on that? You'll appreciate the tension between what Mr. McEwen is saying in his inquiry statement and the evidence that Mr. Harrower gave over the last couple of days. Can I invite your comment on what he said in his evidence?
I think I understand what you're saying. But our role is to investigate Police Scotland and the policies and procedures and the actions of the officers on that day at all levels. So Police Scotland, irrespective of our role, have a duty to preserve evidence and to continue with that inquiry or that investigation as per their procedures. So until we have Crown instruction, all these types of, a death in custody, a death following police contact, a serious incident involving the police, as it always has been, it's the police officers' or police job to preserve that evidence and to maintain their normal policies and procedures in consultation with ourselves, either by phone call or through Gold Group meetings now. But this happened in Kirkcaldy. Doesn't really matter where it happened in the country. You can't just sit back and say, well, PIRC are involved and we need to wait. The death message just needs to wait. It doesn't. It needs to be delivered. You need to look at deployment of flows. Now, you could look at anything else. Is it a need for the flows to be there and then, or continue that process, but you don't hold back on what you should be doing just because the PIRC are involved?
I can return to the evidence that Mr. Harrower gave yesterday. And I'll repeat a little bit just for the context of what comes next. You seem to be saying in your inquiry statement there was a firm expectation, definite expectation on the part of the PIRC that the Police Scotland flows would be deployed initially at that time. Yes, that's where I stopped and invited your comment, but I'd like to pick up there. That has changed slightly, but it still occurs that Police Scotland flows are deployed at the outset of a critical incident, not all the time, but it does still happen regularly. Can you explain to what extent it has changed? There will be occasions, depending on the circumstances and geographically where the incident is. I'm aware that flows from the PIRC side have been deployed from the outset, but I don't know on how many occasions that has been. But certainly, At that time, that was the normal process, that the Police Scotland flows would be deployed initially, and then subsequently there would be a decision made whether PIRC flows were required, and they would get a detailed briefing and handover from Police Scotland formally to the family to then take on that role for the full extent of the investigation. Can I invite your comment on that? How does that evidence fit with your understanding of the procedures that were in place in 2015?
At that time, yes, Police Scotland did deploy flows. I think it's fair to say that since then and now and over the years, the lines of communication have increased significantly in our notification of these instances. I've had 2 or 3 situations at DSI. Myself and my team have been in place before the goal group meeting is ready to go. That's nothing unusual nowadays. So at that time, yes, I would expect Police Scotland to deploy the flows, and my understanding from this incident was that Police Scotland were deploying flows. The need for it now, because of the better communication, the better notification, Police Scotland still deliver the death message. They will still, on occasions, have flows in place, but it's become more of a regular occurrence for after that death message has been delivered and either the SIO or somebody within Police Scotland has informed the family that we will be taking over. It's Crown directed, and Police Scotland are much better at explaining what our role is and why we are there, and the family understand that, and very, very quickly, again, if it is the other end of the country, the flow will make contact from PIRC by phone at the very earliest point. Again, after receiving as much information, whether that be from Police Scotland flows, whether it come from the contact officer or if it's the SIO who's been in contact with the family, what has been discussed, what's the family's expectations, to get as much information as possible before we step in, and you'll have that at the very least. The family will have a telephone introduction followed up by a time and date that suits them for a physical visit by the flow and either the senior investigating officer or the DSI and the SI from a PIRC point of view.
Thank you. Returning one final time to Mr. Harrower's evidence, following on from the passage that we looked at a moment ago, when did the position change in relation to sometimes PIRC flows go in first? I couldn't give you a definitive date on that. I'm not sure. I am quite sure Alistair Lewis would be able to confirm. Is that something you can help us with?
Again, just as I explained, the lines of communication are so much better now that we've either been there as the flow and with me as a DSI or a senior investigator. Again, depending on the logistics of meeting that family. So it's establishing what contact Police Scotland has had with the family and how do we then manage that moving forward. There have been occasions when Police Scotland have had flows in, and for us to introduce a PIRC flow would only complicate matters. So again, you're opening another line of communication. But in these circumstances, I have either deployed a flow or the Police Scotland flows will communicate with me as a DSI, and I will understand what they're saying. And again, should the situation present itself, if I need to go and speak to the family and deploy a flow, then I will do that.
And in what ways have the lines of communication improved over recent years between the PIRC and Police Scotland?
Well, when we first started out, sometimes it was days before we get notification. You're now getting a notification or a phone call, at the very least a phone call within, I've had phone calls within an hour of the incident. That situation, you are very much in a, this has happened. To call it a briefing is brief, it's very much a brief. This has happened, this is where it's happened, and these are the circumstances of the death. That's all we know at the moment, but in an hour's time we're going to a goal group meeting. And as I think I've said before, that has given me an opportunity as a DSI to sit back and look at what I may or may not need and wait for the goal group meeting and to get my staff from on call or others who are not on call into the office ready for hopefully a more detailed briefing from a goal group meeting.
And what's brought about that change, that improvement in communications?
I think it's a better understanding of what our role is, not only within the police but within the Crown Office, as to who we are and what we do, and the importance of Crown being at the goal group meetings. I remember after, I think it was after 6 months, then the Commissioner and I think John McSpawn were in front of the Justice Committee, and the Commissioner described the first few weeks and months of communication as clunky, and but in that 6 months it had improved. I would say that it's almost as good as it's going to get just now, but there's always room for improvement. Should our organisation expand and have more staff in other offices throughout the country, again, that will only improve. One of the good things to come out of COVID was the teams. We now have teams. We don't need to spend as many hours on the road. We can have these meetings and deal with that.
You mentioned teams, and you mentioned earlier in your evidence the possibility of an initial introduction to the family taking place by telephone, particularly if it was late in the evening. Have you, in the recent past, perhaps since COVID, had the opportunity to make an introduction to a family, to introduce yourself, using Teams as a platform?
I've never used Teams to speak to the family, and I appreciate nowadays that we have email and everybody has a mobile phone, but you'll never beat a face-to-face communication with the family. A phone call is second best, but it's not the best. It's not me personally. I would want to be sitting down with the family at the earliest opportunity, irrespective of geographical commitments or logistics. It's something that I could incorporate into that first phone call, if you like, but at some point very early on I'd be looking to sit down with the family, put a face to the name, and get their concerns as early as possible.
I want to ask you some questions now about your appointment as a flow to the family of Shekobayo. I understand from reading your statements that you attended a briefing on the morning of the 4th of May, and you explain in your statements that briefing was by Mr. Harrower, who had been the Deputy Senior Investigator over the weekend, and you were appointed as the flow at that briefing.
Yes.
What time was that briefing? Was that 9 o'clock?
If that's what Keith's putting, yes, I can't remember the exact time.
And who was it that appointed you?
It might have been Irene Scullion who approached me as Head of Investigations.
You were appointed alongside another investigator, John Clarkin.
Yes.
And you explain in your statement that you were identified as the lead flow, and he was to assist you. You were going to be the single point of contact for the family. Mr. Clarkin, did he also have a policing background?
I don't know the exact details, but I think he worked with Garda at one point, and possibly GSOC over in Ireland, the Independent Investigative Authority over there, prior to coming to PIRC.
In a moment, I'm going to ask you to take a look at the first of the 3 flow logbooks. But before we do that, can you explain the purpose of the flow log?
It's a record of contact with the family, whether it's a positive contact or no contact. That's in basic terms, it is a way of recording all contact with the family throughout the whole investigation.
Can we look, please, at the family liaison policy? We've looked at this already. It's PIRC 04460, at what I think is page 20 of the PDF. So if we could stop there, please. There's a section headed Record Keeping, and the paragraph beneath that heading reads, at the outset of every deployment, the flow will be issued with and commence a family liaison log. This log will be where all records of contact will be documented with the family, next of kin, representatives of the family, and any other parties connected with the family. The log should be the only method of recording this contact. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And the guidance goes on to say entries to the log should be made timelessly, accurately, and should be examined at regular intervals by the SI. Let's look at the first log then, PIRC 04150, and I'll remind you there's a hard copy of this in the folder if you'd find it helpful to look at that, Mr. Lewis. So if we could scroll back up the page just a little bit, please, to get our bearings. We'll see PIRC Family Liaison Log, and then in the box beneath that, this log, I assume it refers to the period 4th of May to 11th of May 2015.
Yes.
And it's logbook number 1. I understand there are 3 logs available, and this is the first of the 3. So let's look at the next page, please. Family Liaison Log, victim's name Sheku Ahmed Tejanbayo. Crime incident, death after police contact. The date of the incident, the 3rd of the 5th, 15. Family Liaison Officer, your details are there. If we scroll down, we'll see the date of your appointment is the 4th of the 5th, and the Deputy Family Liaison Officer is John Clarkin. If we keep scrolling down, please. Senior Investigator John McSporran. And then if we could go on to the next page. If we can stop here, please. This is family information. And we see here family member main contact is Addie Johnston. And relationship, although there's a redaction box, I understand that line may have been left blank. What was Addie Johnston's relationship to Sheku Bayo?
Brother-in-law.
Brother-in-law, married to his sister,
Yes.
Caddy. Let's scroll down a little further. Family member secondary contact, Colette Bell, and her relationship was partner. Now, who provided you with this information?
Of the family contacts?
Yes.
I think it would be Keith Harrower that gave me that.
And when was that?
It would either be just prior to the briefing or just after the briefing, as part of the briefing.
So around the time of the briefing. What's the difference between a main contact and a secondary contact?
There's one of the benefits of good practice in relation to families is to have a single point of contact.
Mm-hmm.
I am the single point of contact for the organisation, and to have a single point of contact within the family, who that single point of contact within the family is you have the conversation of he or she is your single point of contact, and any information I provide to Addie on this occasion, that I am confident that information will be cascaded to the family and any of their questions. It's also a good way of, if the family have questions, to put that back through Addie to me to answer those questions, or put it back into investigation. So you have, ideally you want a single point of contact within the family. If there was any issues within the family, which I've had in the past, again, that's one of the reasons it's good practice to have 2 flows deployed. I could deal with one side of the family, and John could have dealt with another side of the family, so you have that flexibility to assist in maintaining contact with the family if there was some sort of split within the family. On this occasion there wasn't, so Addie was my point of contact.
And why is he the main contact rather than Colette Bell, who's the secondary contact?
He was identified very early on as being the main contact for the family.
Identified by whom?
It was Addie himself who said initially he would be contact, but at the same time he was seeking advice from Mr. Anwar, who eventually became my point of contact within the family.
So it was Addie himself who told you he would be the point of contact
Yes.
for the family. And you said that the purpose of the single point of contact is that you will have confidence that any information that you give to that individual will then be cascaded.
It's establishing those parameters with that person to make sure that information has been cascaded to the family.
And by the time of your involvement, Addie had already identified himself as the single point of contact.
Yes.
What did you do to satisfy yourself that he had taken it upon himself to cascade information to everyone within the family, including Colette?
Yeah, I spoke to him on the day, on the 4th. Before I left, I confirmed that he was a single point of contact for the family.
I think there's an entry to that effect in the logs. We'll maybe
think so,
return
yeah.
to this when we come to that particular conversation. Can we return to the family liaison policy, please, and look at page 9? At the top of page 9, there's a section headed Identifying the Family. The term family should include partners, parents, siblings, children, guardians, and others who have had a direct and close relationship with the victim. Now, the list is not exhaustive, of course, and in the paragraph that follows, the need to take account of family dynamics is emphasised. But we don't see any particular reference in that list to in-laws.
It's part of the family. It's not you don't forget about other members of the family. That's why you have a single point of contact.
Mm-hmm.
It does include in-laws. It does include. It's a very difficult job for a member of the family to take on board because it involves a significant amount of responsibility, and cascading that information to the family is of significant importance as well. So just because it doesn't say in-laws there, that doesn't mean to say you discard them. It's the family as a whole. What is the family? What is the dynamics of the family?
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's going back to if the for argument's sake, it was a very large family and they wanted 2 point of contacts, then that can be accommodated. It's not, to say you would not, as you say, it's not exhaustive. So if somebody came to me as an in-law or a cousin or whoever it was who wanted to know information and that was possible, it would be looked at.
Mm-hmm. I didn't mean to suggest that in-laws should be
No.
left out of account or that they couldn't take on the role of being single
Oh, yeah.
point of contact. And I would anticipate in your experience there may be occasions where it's perhaps in everyone's interests that the single point of contact is someone who's perhaps not a blood relative and has just something of a degree
Yeah.
of distance. And as we've agreed, the list is not exhaustive. I just note that it doesn't include in-laws, but it does include at the very, very top partners.
Yes.
And I'm just keen to understand why it was that Addie was identified as being the main point of contact for this family rather than Colette Bell, whom, as you're aware, was Shekabayo's partner
Yeah.
and mother of his child.
Yeah, I fully understand that, and as I said, that was the single point of contact, and from the very outset, and I think I've mentioned in my statement, I would have preferred a much higher level of involvement with the family on a day-to-day basis, and any concerns from any member of the family of not being told what was going on, then I could have accommodated that quite easily. If that meant going to see Addie or whoever the family contact was to explain what we're doing, and then meant I had to go and repeat myself to another member of the family 10 minutes, 15, 20 minutes later, then that's my role to do that.
Let's look at the paragraph beneath the list of bullet points. The SI must always take into account the possible dynamics of a family's structure to ensure that an appropriate level of support is offered. This is particularly important in situations where the family is extended, split in some way, or involves the possible association of the victim with a particular culture or lifestyle. What do you understand it to mean where the policy says that the SI must always take account of the dynamics of the family's structure?
You're doing an investigation, so again, going back to keeping an open mind, we're starting an investigation. Any investigation you're starting from a briefing paper, which is a briefing paper, you're basically being told an incident has occurred and you've got a time and a date for it. That's when we then start the investigation to get to a conclusion, not the other way about. So it is his responsibility or her responsibility to look at the dynamics of the family structure. Does he only need one flow as a flow coordinator? It's my job to say, go back and say we might need more than one flow. We might need 2, we might need 3. That is part of the role. But until you get that engagement with the family and establish the dynamics of the family and the circumstances of their expectations. You will never understand that, so it is about communication and speaking to, if need be, Addy and Colette, but on this occasion, from the very outset, it was Addy who was my point of contact.
Thank you. Bear with me a moment, please. I'm conscious of the time, so...
We'll stop for lunch and sit at 2 o'clock.